Hello everyone, what's up? Welcome to Simulation. We are now sitting down with Dr. Eduardo Torres-Jara. Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for coming on the show.
Well, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yes, we're so excited, especially because sensitive robotics is so important to talk about.
It is.
Everyone and their mother's talking about computer vision.
Correct.
But not enough people are talking about this tactical sensing and the sensitivity that's associated with it. We're going to unpack this in so much detail. Yeah. I'm really excited to do so. Let's give a little bit of background. So Eduardo is a PhD in AI and robotics from MIT. He then works with the MIT AI lab for 10 years. Then he professed at Worcester Polytechnic Institute for 5 years, and then was at the Stanford Research Institute for 3 years as well as a senior research engineer. And so then he's now at Arevo, also as a senior scientist for a year, working on some 3D printing in airplanes, bicycles, and also the founder of this theory of sensitive robotics.
Yes.
And so, okay, let's go back to the early days, this MIT days when you were first getting into AI and robotics. What drew you to the field?
So, I always, like any kid, are fascinated by science fiction, right? So you see these robots doing these cool things and, being capable of that, these amazing things. And so I was in Ecuador, where I did my undergrad and where I'm originally from. So I proposed first, let's do a robot as my thesis. And the emphasis was more into telecommunications, signal processing. And remember, this is the end of the 80s, sorry. So it's like there were not much technology available to us to do the experimentation. But, they let me play as a thesis. So I built my robot with wood, get step motors from all different places. And we put it together. And at that time, artificial intelligence was having a big conversation about what is the best way to do it. Normally it was done as a top-down approach. So there is a brain, and the body will just execute what the brain is telling you. Rod Brooks at that time was leading a different way to do it, which was a bottom-up approach. So if we have a body, then we can create intelligence by using the sensing and using the body as part of this process. And so it was very controversial because he was taking a very extreme position, like no planning at all, while the other people was, if you don't have any planning, there's no possible to do it. And so that conversation brought a lot of light of you don't only need to do it one way, but the other way is very useful. And many things came out of this, at least this claim that came out of this, the probes that went to different planets were smaller with more limited computational capabilities and simple tasks, as opposed to the large robots that we are supposed to send before, which are very big, too heavy even to put into the rockets and send it to the other planets. And so I started reading those kind of papers back in Ecuador, and I was like, this is fascinating. You can do very simple robots. At that time, one of the inspirations for Rod Brooks were insects. And so the robots were very simple and very capable. So we always were saying that, you have this big robot with computer vision, and it will take a few minutes to take every step because it was making a model of everything, doing the calculation, and being capable of moving. But the ants are this small. They have all the capability they need, and they can survive, not only walk and do all these things. So the idea was to do a connection more directly between the sensors and actuation and modulate that interaction. And so I was like, this is fascinating, I want to do that. And so it was ideal for us. We'll have a small robot, very simple computation, and we built, we call it the first robot in Ecuador. I'm not sure if that was true. I made it to national television. I was like, I like this. And so I didn't know English at that time, so I was like, okay, I'm going to study the language, and I started applying to schools. And I applied to MIT because Rod Brooks was there. I was like, I had to work with this guy.
Rod Brooks.
And so I applied after some years of studying English. What happened is that all these schools reject me, but MIT. MIT actually gave me a fellowship, and it was given by Rod Brooks, so I will go work directly with Rod Brooks. and working in like humanoids already. So it was all fascinating.
Dream come
that's
true.
That's how it came, right? That's how the whole research started in that area.
Yeah.
And then then the whole story that they start with small projects, humanoids, navigation. And at that time, we have a lot of funding.
Let's go back to the ant quick, and then we'll go there.
Yeah, let's go. Yeah.
This is interesting. You bring up this comparison. We've always thought that this robot that can sense everything needs to be large. But when you look at just the smallest creature of like the ant, and also I remember I was learning about this in terms of neuronal computing as well, as in the human brain, you don't need anywhere near as much as this to be able to figure things out. For example, the fly only has like less than 50 neurons, very small amount of neurons, but it can sense its environment and buzz around and fly around and land and engage with the environment with so little neurons versus our 86 billion. So the same thing with the ant. The ant is so small, and then how does the ant that small be able to perceive its environment and survive in its environment, not only move around but survive? And then how do we take the perception systems, the tactical sensing of robots, and bring it to that small size?
Right. So that was the inspiration of much of this work, right?
Yeah.
And what this big conversation addressed during the 80s mainly, which is, why these very small bodies can do all these things, and we're building this huge thing with all this computation. And what mainly, I guess, was understood is that there's a direct connection between the sensing and the actuation, and the neurons and all the neurological system was modulating the interaction as opposed to try to create a model of everything. And
say that again. Say
so
that one more time.
It's just modulating the interaction between the actuation and the sensing, instead of approach the problem as we as scientists were approaching, which was let's model everything around, because as engineers and scientists we want to have a model and we can operate in that model and say, if we apply this force here, the robot will go there. And if we know that there's an obstacle there, we will go around as opposed to go in that direction. So it becomes like
this sensing modulation, is that more than in the near the local areas of the body sensing and modulation, versus you were saying making a whole entire diagram and explanation of what's going on every moment of what's happening and then acting on that.
Right. So there was a lot of evidence on we humans don't have a full model of everything that's happening. There's some experiments where they ask you to assemble Legos where they show you the model here and you had to put together the same thing here. But as you go back and forth, they alter the model, and you don't notice. And it's not because we're not smart. It's just that's how we work. We just focus on things, and so we don't need all that information.
I love that one.
Yeah, there are many of those.
You see the basketball. Count the amount of times the basketball gets passed by the team in white.
Exactly.
And then the gorilla runs through and you're not looking at the gorilla, and they show it to you afterward.
Exactly.
The
Legos
Legos is interesting too.
Which one?
The one you brought up with the Legos.
Oh yeah. There are many experiments in psychology and people who study all these areas in neuroscience, which have shown that we don't have a model of everything, but still we are way more dexterous than the robots that will have a model of everything.
So it's almost as though when we look at the one version of the Legos, then we see, okay, I have to put the long green rectangle piece on this part. Okay. Move over to that part. I'm moving the green rectangle piece. I've lost this model out of my head almost.
The global model.
The global, the one with all of the different, only the green part. So when I look back and I see the green still there, I'm like, yes. But then you might have added a blue one to the corner over here, and I don't know that.
Correct. Yeah. Correct. And so, and then other things, that came out or that are exploited now is that not everything has to go to the brain, right? So our model is very hierarchical. We have a hierarchy of in the nervous system. So the brain only takes care of high-level functions. As we go down, then we touch, cerebellum and the spinal cord and all these parts. all of them do local computation, and so all reflexes only go to the spine cord, and so we modulate that, or it's believed that we modulate that type of reflection as opposed to plan every motion that we do. Yeah. In robotics, for example, or manipulation, when you want to do some tasks like moving your glass and bring it over here, there will be a plan, or one of the approaches is this, will be a plan to get there, grab the glass, bring it to you, but everything is known. There's some additional work and say, well, if we add some...
If the glass is moved.
Right,
yeah.
But now, we can say, okay, nowadays we have better perception, so we have cameras, we have lasers, we can say, yes, you can compensate for things. But the approach itself is like, we have this big plan, we have this model of everything. The other alternative is like, well, we can have a rough approximation of things and use the sensors as we need it. So visually, it's a good idea. Well, the glass is over there. I can try to use my hand to go in that direction. The opposite will be if I had no idea, then I will have to explore all the table to find out where the glass is. Yes. But when you get there, there are other sensors that are more important. So tactile feedback turns out to be one of them, and that is one focus of my research, because we try to do many things with computer vision and too much with computer vision, because what happens many things, like there's a saying, it's like we believe that we think that we know how we think. And every time that we do this, it's a problem. Because no, we think that way, and we say it. And
we believe we know the way that we think.
Exactly.
But we pretty much know less than what we do know.
Most of the times has been the case.
I don't believe nothing.
Most of the cases has happened is like we believe it was going to work that way, but that as we explore more, research more, turns out it didn't. It was completely a different approach, either a lot simpler or things like that. And so that is a typical flow that we as researchers run into in this field. And so getting back to this tactile sensing, was like, well, so when we get to do manipulation, should we still keep focusing on having a plan and moving the robot very precisely, or should we try to do something else? Or, like nowadays there's a lot of hype in AI, and sometimes, I hear this assertion is like, well, if you have the AI, the computer vision will figure out everything, we'll have a model, and then we will just use existing arm, like with industrial arm, and the industrial arm is very precise, so it will get where we tell them to go, and the things will be solved. And that was the thinking early on in AI as well. But what is very important is that doesn't completely work, because if you don't include the interaction of the body, or you don't even consider that, things won't work. And that's why we see robots that are, very fast and very precise at motion, but when you change something in the environment, they cannot adapt. And tasks as simple as like, again, we're going to get to this. I'm just going to get some water and drinking. A lot of other sensors besides the vision were involved.
Yeah.
So my computer vision most likely was telling me, okay, so in this case, human vision is telling me, okay, that's where I should go. But I don't need the information in computer vision to grab it once I get there.
Yeah.
And this breaks many of the assumptions.
Yeah.
That means that if I don't need to be very precise, then my arm can be a lot softer. And when the arm is a lot softer, now I can make contact with things without damaging or without knocking them over. There's a specific reason why precise arms have to be stiff. If you try to do this with a precise arm, a robotic arm, most likely will knock it over, or you have to be very slow to get there. We humans are really good at what I call the interaction with the world. So we can do this. I'm sitting here, I'm doing all these tasks because my sensors are telling me you are stable, there's no enough stress to break you, so my legs are in a flat surface, so the force has been distributed. I was getting back to the example of like when I get some water, when they actually are drinking, a lot of your tactile sensing is actually helping you.
Yes.
And the example I used to describe some of the reasons why tactile sensing is so important.
The first one is that the cup meets the lips,
right?
So that you don't spill.
Exactly. So that means that you don't have to be precise. But that's a really good point, right? So you don't have to be precise because I can keep moving until I make contact.
Yes.
But we are soft, so we can make contact without damaging. But even more important, when you start drinking it, you need to have the feedback to say the water is inside, and you can close your lips according to what you need. Yes. An example to prove this is that when you have Novocaine, when you go to the dentist and you don't feel your part of your mouth, when you try to drink water, I don't know if you went through that example ever, but what happens, you pour the water and you just like, or you have a lot of, like, you have to concentrate a lot to try to do this simple task that's drinking.
Yeah.
So
because your senses are
because
gone.
your sensors are gone, and so you don't know what's happening. And so
and your vision, and the vision doesn't even matter.
Doesn't really matter.
It's so weird.
Right.
Yeah.
And even if you focus because you don't have the sensing, that's important, right? Even if you use your whole human brain and try to say, oh, where's the water? You don't know because you don't have the sensing. This is so important that there's some humans that have lost the capability of tactile sensing. Usually from the neck down. There's one from neck down and one from half the face, I believe. The one from half the face need to be retrained for many hours to actually be able to eat. Using only the position of the hand and computer vision because it's so complicated. The other person has a lot of problems even walking because that information is on your tactile sensing and your skin, which is kind of interesting. Like if you think back, is that even a cell can sense what's around it, the limits of the cell, and that should be one of the first sensors that need to interact in the real world. And we are building robots without that capability, which in some cases makes sense, right? So if you want a crane that's very strong, you just want to move one thing from one side to the other, it's okay. A person can go and put the hooks where you need it, and then the crane can do it. That's one type of task. But if we want dexterity and interacting with the world, then that approach doesn't work. And now we can try to emulate more what we humans have and do the tasks in a different way. So
this is the premise of your
that's
research.
The premise of the research.
Okay,
and so I can show you a video if you want that.
Let's do it, and then give us a little bit of history right before that. The research was done at MIT with Rod Brooks.
MIT with Rod Brooks. Correct.
Rod Brooks.
Correct.
And then this was in 2000.
2004, I think we started.
2004. Yeah. Okay, and then it ended around 2000.
In MIT, and then around 2008.
2008. Okay.
But then I continue as a professor.
As a professor.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Let's show us.
Okay. So let's see. We have it there.
Yes.
So before I play it, let me just give you a little background. So what you see there is a robot that I call Obrero. So robot means human worker in Czech, I think, and Obrero means human worker in Spanish.
Wait, robot?
Yes, means worker in Czech.
In Czech?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Holy cow. Okay. And so, Obrero.
Obrero, which would be the same, similar to sombrero, like Obrero.
Cool.
And the idea is that this robot captures some of the hardware and the sensing and the architecture that humans have, so it's inspiring humans.
Yeah.
And what you see there, it's a little bit like a dark right there, is a person in front of the robot is going to move a ceramic cap. You see that in the table there's no fixtures as most of the industrial robots have for their parts.
Yeah.
And also there's no specific marker on the table where we're going to put the cap. So it's going to be more similar to humans. Now, what will happen if we have industrial robot doing this? We will have need to model where exactly the cap is and move very careful or very fast, but to the exact position without colliding with the cap.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah,
closing it specifically to the dimensions of the cap and then moving it to the different position. Here, the robot's going to behave more like a human. At the beginning, it's going to look at the motion of the cap. I'm going to make the robot blind on purpose to show the power of the tactile sensing after showing the motion.
Awesome.
And so the robot now is going to explore by touching the cap and feeling its way around. So we don't need a model of the cap because as feeling goes, the palpation goes around, you understand what's happening with the cap and you can position the right place.
And it does build a model.
It does. In this case, we use a very simplified model.
Okay.
But as we progress, we can build more complex models.
In the plane, in the three-dimensional plane, as it touches, does it make markings in the plane?
Right. When we'll say we're not learning in the three-dimensional space, we're learning in the sensing space.
In the sensing space.
We're trying to understand more directly what's happening on the sensor.
Got it.
So it's a different map.
On the sensors on that hand.
Exactly.
Okay, cool.
And then once that happens, there are more important tasks that are overlooked in more traditional approach. When actually lifting, the way it's done is usually you close the robot to a given position because you have pre-calculated or experimented to see what's the minimum force that you need. This robot actually senses that you are getting to the point, and when you move around up, it's feeling that
it's
there
not
is no
sliding.
slipping away. And it keeps a stable grasp. And more important now is moving, right? So when you're gonna bring it back, what happens in the normal robot is you take the glass, here's the surface where I'm gonna put it, it's coming here and someone has told you exactly what's the height and you just put it there. And when you're very close, you just let it go. So basically, it fall over the surface.
Oh, because there's no tactical.
Right. That's why many times we have a fixture which is padded to avoid breaking something like this, if we're handling something like this. This robot, on the other hand, when it comes back, it actually touches, as we humans do, the surface. It feels with tactile feedback that I have support for the object.
No slippage.
And then I let it go.
Got it.
So you will see that in the video. So let's play it. There it is. So the person is shaking the cap in front. The robot is looking at, closing the eyes right now. And the fingers are very soft. So they're not precise, are soft and sensitive.
Oh, wow. And it even flinged back.
Exactly.
Oh, so cool.
So if you compare with a traditional robot, a robot is very stiff to avoid those motions. But here I do it to avoid knocking it over. So now it's lifting it, and moving it back, and when it makes contact, it feels that now there's safe contact, and now let it go.
Let goes, yeah.
What is interesting is that I don't have to change the algorithm for a set of objects. As long as the object is sticking out, the robot will be able to do it.
So interesting.
So, it's generalizable, it's understand. And now,
but it probably won't be able to, with that style of hand, it probably can't pick up something as small as maybe an eraser or a couple grains of rice or something small.
Well, let me tell you that that's not correct. We actually can do it. And I'll
with
show you the next video.
Okay, cool.
We'll say it in this version, but you bring a very important point. So that kind of manipulation that you saw right now is what's called whole body grasp. So you have the object and you use your fingers as arms and you embrace the object.
Yes.
That's whole body grasp.
Whole body grasp.
That's great.
Okay.
Now, what you mentioned, using the fingertips, we humans are very dexterous at using the fingertips. And we call this precise manipulation. And when you hear precise, you imagine that the robot needs to be more precise for many reasons. Right now, you are dealing with smaller dimensions. So if you try to grab something smaller, that will be very difficult. So usually the approach is like, let's do something that's even more precise. So this type of approach will be right away is that's not going to work. But we have proved the opposite, that this approach, using more sensing, then precision is better because we can actually deal with that. And that's how, in theory, we believe humans do it. So let me jump into that.
Let's do it.
Let me find the video right here. And I'm going to show you in two parts. Let me just give you first the context.
Ron, isn't this amazing? Sensitive robotics.
It's the future. So this is the hand you saw.
Yeah.
By the way, the reason for that shape of the sensor is because human inspired. is inspired in the ridges of the tactile on the human fingertips.
Let's explain this first.
We'll,
When we were first hanging out, you gave me the explanation. I was literally leaning against the wall when we were talking, and you were like, you know the reason why you're so stable right now.
You can stay there.
Yeah, because I felt.
Let me show these videos, and then we get back to a longer explanation of that, and then we walk into walking.
Okay.
So here, this hand was made with traditional engineering. So parts were made with aluminum and machined with precision, but the fingers were done so that they're imprecise but soft. First thing, soft because we want to make contact. Very important thing. Most of the robots cannot do that.
3 fingers.
This one has 3 fingers.
3 fingers, yeah.
Here, this
and
project.
It's so interesting. It's made just like except there are two of these
phalanges as opposed to 3.
Phalanges, yeah.
That is, arguable. Probably we need more depending on you need it. But this was, in engineering is a trade-off, right? It's like if I make it too complex, I never get to test it. I actually want to test it. So in these 2 phalanges, the phalanges are coupled. So when I close it, always doing this. Yeah. In this robot, the phalanges are uncoupled, so they're actually more like the human one, but only 2. We have 3. Now, this was done imprecisely with 3D printing. So precision is something that was important in this hand. It was like make it very sensitive. So the fingers again are soft, the joints are soft, and the sensors were reduced on site. Let me tell you a little bit of background.
What is the material made of?
Silicon rubber.
It's silicon rubber.
Yes.
Okay, so and then you'll explain what's underneath soon. Yes.
So what happens here is like this was ABB paying for this research. ABB is a large company together with NASA and some other sponsor, I forgot. And when they came to us, said, well, 80% of all the tasks that we are requested to do with our robots, we cannot do it. Can you help us to solve it? And this was the solution. Completely orthogonal to traditional manipulation. I mentioned that because later DARPA came and said, well, we want you to deal with something that's very complex, which is handling the biconvex pieces that you use to play Go. Have you ever played Go? Sometimes they call it Chinese chess.
Yes.
So
the one that is now the world champion has lost that.
Correct. So those are very slippery pieces. Like if you touch them inside, they could slip away to the point that the professional players to have really good control, they put the fingers like this.
Yeah, because it's a very slippery pieces. Correct. They're like little flat circles.
Exactly. We'll see it.
Yeah.
So this robot's going to do that. That task is usually so complicated that people use suction caps, and they forget about this, forget the problem, simplify by doing that. And manipulation in industry has gone that way. It's like, let's put just suction caps and that way. So that's not always the case. So let me show you this first. There was computer vision that positioned the arm roughly over the board, and those fingers now.
Oh, I see what's doing. That's
coming
a good
down.
Yeah.
You'll see how it's going to act more like humans. So it's touching one side, tilting it over, using the other finger to get under, to scoop it, and leaving it.
Awesome.
Remember, this is precision manipulation because now we're talking about millimeters precision, done with no precision, done with sensing. Because I sense the touch, I send under, the fingers are no precise.
This is the eraser example that I was bringing up earlier. That's basically the same size. An eraser on the end of a pencil, about the same size as a Go piece.
Right. There's a limitation. I'll not explain what's the limitation because if the piece becomes smaller, it's difficult to manipulate. So that's why we sometimes just stick it with our fingers to the grain of rice or use tweezers. Right. That's why there's a limit. Right.
Yeah.
But here, look at that. So I'll show you the same thing you saw in fast with a fast camera. So the robot's coming down. Pay attention to this finger. This finger is given in a little bit. So that's very important because these fingers are soft. If this robot was rigid, like normal technology is when we're using robots, you will have either broke the fingertip of the robot or leave a really big mark on the table.
It has to be like that silicon softness.
This one is the second level of softness. It's not only the sensors, the softness on the fingers. That's why we humans can do this with no problem. Not because of the skin, but because of the of the muscles and the tendons that we have under. So this is easy, we don't break it. That's the same thing.
Yeah.
Now that we did this, let me go to the next slide. I'm going to try to move the finger on this moment, my right, towards the left, so I can actually grab it. But what happens, if I only do that, then it moves a little bit, but it gets stopped by the board, which is on your way. So what do? Then we compensate with the wrist. And so when you compensate with the wrist, the tactile sensors itself is helping you to do that task. So we use sensitivity to touch it, compliance on the fingers, and we're capable to do this. So we have replaced precision with sensitivity. It turns out that that opens a lot of possibilities for this approach. I was going to explain first the sensors before we jump into walking.
Okay.
Should we go there? To explain how the sensors work? Or you want to see a walking robot with this technology?
Let's explain the sensing first. Yes, let's do that. Yes.
Let's do a very simple...
Which I've started to call the opposite octopus.
Correct, because it looks like a suction cup inverter, right? So let me explain with this picture here. So this is a sectional cut of the skin.
Yeah.
We're going to focus on the side that has no hair. And this is not the greatest zoom in, but the idea is that these are the sensors that detect shear forces. They are the ones that detect normal forces. We, as electrical engineers, have built many versions of this, and we have done amazing things. However, when you put in a robot, many times they don't work. Because what for us turns out to be very important is that this is the ridge and the fingertip.
Yeah.
And that geometry has the property that is prone to make contact and easy to deform. And that is part of why the system is so good in our fingertips.
Versus being
flat. Versus the flat, it would be a lot more difficult. So a lot of people design sensors, put it under, or expose directly to the surface. There's a lot of theory that I can explain, like why they don't work. But that's the key idea.
Let's give the example of when we were hanging out. When you taught me that, I was standing and leaning against the wall when we were talking, and then you told me that the reason why you're able to do this and talk right now is because you have the sensitivity perception system, your tactile feedback from the wall. Right. You know that once you hit the wall, that is going to support you and that you're supporting. That's why you can lose a little bit of balance or power on your leg and stuff like that. And then further, then you explained to me that the reason why we can feel like the wall in its all of its little bumps and ridges and everything is because of the fingerprint, all of the little ridges on the fingerprint. Because if at home, if you look at your fingerprint, you see that it's kind of like this big canyon. Every single one of those little ridges as you go to the center of your finger, so a little ridge. And so then that is what enables you to feel these bigger differences.
Directionality and this pressure. Yes.
Yeah.
Both of them.
Versus if it was flat, if there were no ridges.
It would be a lot more difficult to do anything. And that's why many sensors will flat.
Yeah,
it's very, very cool. And that, so inspired on that, we create those bubbles, and those bubbles basically do the same thing.
Biologically inspired.
Correct.
I really enjoy that. We just had Arvind Gupta from IndieBio on the show, and we love biological inspiration. The whole world can be programmed with the code of biology in a way that's more sustainable, and in this case is more innovative. We're able to get there faster because we leverage what we already know.
Or the way to say it too is like, there's a system that already works that's out there in many different embodiments. Why don't we take a look at that? And usually those are the things that we came out with. And so it turns out that I start with manipulation. We're able to solve a lot of different more complex problems. There's a lot of videos that shows every one of the details. But it turns out that it's very useful in other areas. So walking robots is one of them. So let me jump into one of them. I'll show you.
When will we do the opposite octopus? When do you want to do that?
You mean you want to see the sensor?
Should we do that?
Sure.
Should we do that first, then we'll do the walking? Okay, let's do that.
So
I think people are interested in it. Yeah, let's do it.
So that's the sensor. It is is a semi-sphere inverted.
Semi-sphere.
Right. That half the semi-sphere.
Yep.
Half the sphere, a semi-sphere.
Yep. And then there's a dip. Right.
No, that dip is what happens when I'm applying the force.
When applying the force.
Yeah. So when we apply a force, we deform the structure, and we can detect that deformation.
Interesting.
I use different technologies to detect that deformation.
So then the sensor is located in the middle.
Exactly.
So when it gets pushed down,
Exactly.
the sensor sees that it's being
Exactly.
okay.
And can give you an estimation of the force. But not only detect the normal force, but also the lateral forces. So you can deform anyway.
So the load can come from the side,
Exactly.
and it'll be pushed down towards this side, and then
Or can be combined,
horizontal
right?
displacement, like you're saying, horizontal versus vertical displacement. And then what is, so this is again the silicon, but then what is the sensor?
Oh, there are many ways to do it as long as you have displacement, and there are like a lot of patents on that.
What's the sensor?
In this case that you see specifically is a magnetic version. So
It's a magnetic?
Yeah, so there's a Hall effect that is detecting the energy of a magnet. But there are many other ways. That was the first one that I did it.
Have you moved on to something better?
Yes.
Can we talk
that is on the wrap, so we're not telling much about it
Okay.
yet.
Hopefully soon we'll be able to know. Yeah. Okay.
But we have many versions on that, and we have exclusive
so
patents
interesting.
on the area.
It's so interesting because there's so many different ways to make these semi-spheres with the sensor and the displacement. So what's going to be the one that ends up being the best?
Correct. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That is how we start this.
Yeah.
So now that we had that, we create models, we did mathematical models of this, and we have simulations. But let me show you something that's a little bit more.
And you guys get
Fun.
how it's like the opposite of the octopus, because it's like the octopus has all those suction cups like in say pairs of two here, but they're inverted. They're not the semisphere outward, they're inward on the semisphere, and so this is exactly the opposite. It's the opposite octopus with those cups.
Yes, the mirror version.
Yeah. Yeah, the mirror version, opposite octopus.
So, the walking is a complex problem.
Oh, wow, there they are, right on the feet.
So, it turns out that, we use a lot of VOR information. VOR is the vestibular information that, we have in the inner ear. We have information about our rotation or acceleration.
So we could not walk if we lost sensing.
So people who have done it have a lot, they have to be retrained, and some of them cannot walk right because of that. If you actually get to lose that information, and a lot of people have problems with that sense, with losing sensitivity in the feet for many reasons, and that's what you need to.
We don't even think twice about when I'm walking. I put my heel and my front of my foot down, and I know stable. I move next leg. We don't think too much about that.
Right.
But
Right. So there's a lot of
we think about what we're going to send on
exactly.
Twitter.
There's a lot of research on can we use the tactile feedback on the feet to actually do the walking instead of trying to use or combine with the VOR information. So we built this robot that is a CAD simulation, but model, but soon I'll show you the actual robot.
Awesome.
It looks very similar. And we put tactile feedback on the feet because you can walk blindly, right? You don't need any information from vision.
If you're not next to a cliff.
Correct. But even if you're in stairs, if you know the house, you can touch it and you can start going, feeling it around.
There's a step.
So you can do a lot
That's
without
interesting.
it.
You do stairs, yeah.
So in general, computer vision is very helpful for predicting what's in front. But then when you are to act, and when you are with the body in the middle, you need to understand where your body is or how it's interacting with the external world, and the way to do it is, in this case, with tactile feedback. So that, I call this even contact robotics or things like that. So most of the robotics that you see outside, like, driving cars or helicopters or any of those are like no contact robotics, right? So a car, sure, there's contact with the floor, but that's all they do. You are not trying to make contact with anything, you're trying to avoid it. Same for the flying robots and things like that.
And what did you call that?
I call it
flying robots.
Oh, the flying robots.
What did you call it? It was the
contact robotics.
But they're the opposite. They don't want to make contact.
Exactly. So I don't know. I call this contact robotics, which is it has a contrast with other type of robots like
Gotcha,
like
which don't want to
navigation.
make
Right.
contact.
Exactly.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Or, like a helicopter don't want to make contact when you do landing, but we don't pay attention much to that. It's like, okay, that's a difficult test.
Yeah.
If you see a bird flying, that's an important part for them, right? So they can go and like land on a branch, no problem, right? And I'll talk a little bit about it in a second.
Okay.
So this is in walking, and so I'm just gonna show you, this is the actual robot. You see it looks very similar to the CAD model. My students were like creative enough to actually paint it the same color and everything. And so let me show you a couple of videos about that, or at least one on that. So this is the kind of reaction that you can have when you have a robot with sensitive feet. So there, as you move, you see that dot is showing what's the center of pressure of the robot as we move.
Let's have Ronnie. Let's have Ronnie zoom in on the top left corner for us. Okay.
Yep.
All right. Thank you, Ron.
So on the side, you see the center of pressure, and you see the robot two views, one lateral and one front. And the student here is moving it with her hand just to show how the robot reacts. We can play it.
Okay.
Let me see. There. So you see the robot move to the left, so the center of pressure moves, so the position. So we can estimate where's the main position and what part of and what is the force in all the area of the foot. So that's important for us to keep a stability. So let's go to the next video, which is the one
top
on your
right corner.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can play it, and then what is happening there is the student there is putting a book under the sensors, and you see the robot is actually reacting.
It is
to the book, to the surface of the book. So as they move along, then we show that we have sensitivity to that. And so the first coordinated task they did it. Let's go to the last one.
Last video on the bottom of the page when we get a chance, Ronnie. Thank you.
So that one is the robot is standing on its own, but as opposed to just like locking the legs and trying, like a piece of furniture, is actually feeling the distribution of the forces on the feet and computing so actually can get stabilized. So it's more like a baby trying to stand up for the first time.
Yeah.
And so it's, the advantage is that once you get this, then you can deal with any kind of surfaces. I know you have seen many of the walking robots, they walk in flat surfaces because it's easy to predict where you're gonna stand. There's some done by Boston Dynamics that are more advanced that they don't need that specific.
Speaking of which, we were trying to get you guys onto the show when we were in Boston. We're coming back for you. We're coming back and we'll get you on the show.
Well, so let me tell you, one of my students, the student who built this, now works for Boston Dynamics. So he actually brought this robot to show them, and he was hired.
It's so funny how they just grab talent like that.
So that's his. I mean, he did the mechanical part. The work you see here is like the advanced version, which the student who just showed up before was the one doing it. Yep. But that's so they have that talent with them.
Wow.
So that let me show you one more example how sensitive robotics change things. We have two, but let's focus on one for now.
Because we still want to run you through a bunch of our questions at the end.
So let me show these slides. I'm going to show in sequence a few of them. So these are flying robots. I mean, these are flying creatures, birds, and so they're really good at manipulating the air. So flying, we can think as manipulating the air. For that, we need to feel it. And since you're doing that motion, it's very important because we focus on that, right? We believe that, we need the flapping, and it's very important, the flapping does a lot of the
And then there's the gliding through the wind, too, and the flap.
And these robots, for example, are flappers, right? This is done by Festo, and this, I don't know, was paid by DARPA, I think. And it's, it's a hummingbird who can stay in place. But if you see what happened on the the anatomy of these animals. You see your hands and you see the bats. It's very similar, you just have deformed fingers.
Whoa.
Same for the birds, right? It's just deformed fingers, right? So we have exactly the same anatomy. And how do we do the flying now?
Yeah.
So let's go to the next part.
Hold on, go back one more time.
Yeah.
This is so interesting.
Yeah, it's very like revealing, right? It's
Yeah.
like exactly the same bonds. And, you can see even for swimming will be the same argument because the turtle and the dolphin have the same thing. So let's go to the flying. And so turns out that there's a classification of the feathers, and this one here called filoplume is on the base when you connect to the bone. And so the feathers, as they move, you can understand how they're moving, and that gives you information about your interaction with the air. So you have the acting of your fingers and interacting with air. So instead of the tactile feedback, now we have, this is their tactile feedback, this air feedback. So this is interesting because, if you think about airplanes, we have one sensor for the air, sometimes two. Only the fighters have two.
So you said through the feathers they get the tactile sensing.
Right, that's their tactile sensing. So
interesting.
So when birds are flying, they have all the information of the air. In the airplane, we only have two. In the airplane, we use brute force, so we create in a laminar flow, and then we put the profile into that to do the flying. Here, we sense the air, we take advantage of the air.
That's so interesting. So they have so a bird has a full model of the airflow going all around them at all times. Yeah. Oh, that's so cool.
So that's why they can do amazing things, right? So they can even stop and create a stall condition, which is a bad thing for an airplane. But a bird can go fly and create a stall conditions and land on the branch.
And land on the branch. Oh,
and so those kind of things are. So we create.
I know I can't, that's like, everyone always that question when people are like, oh, what kind of an animal would you want to be? And I always think like, I want to fly so bad, but I also want to really go into the depths of the ocean, like an octopus or a squid or a dolphin or something. Yeah,
you can transform.
Ron, what do you think?
Be careful what you wish for. That's all I can tell you.
The next life is
life is short. This is just a human experience.
But the top of the bird food chain or the top of the ocean food chain would be okay.
That will be fine. You'll survive, Bob.
Yeah.
So here we create, we put in a profile and we put these feathers, which have sensors to detect that kind of motion. So we put in the water tunnel and we see how they behave, and we put it on the air tunnel, and so we can detect the speed of the air by seeing how they oscillate. And here's a stall condition. In purpose, we put it like this to actually say, okay, now we can stop, no flying, landed. So that was the project to do smarter airplanes with sensitive robotics. Because if you feel it, then you can do a lot of things. In control, there exists
maybe one day the airplane will just come to the
tarmac and just there. I'm sure it will be practical. There are many considerations, right?
Yeah.
But this is understanding how we can make now, getting back to AI. So artificial intelligence have these two currents, as I mentioned, the top-down and the bottom-up. So with manipulation and with some other examples, we have shown that we can do a lot by using bottom-up.
Yeah.
And problems that have been very complicated before, now this approach will make it easier.
Yeah.
And it's not only about software. That's a very key part.
Exactly.
We believe that AI is always software. This is what's called embodied AI.
Yeah.
That name was, I think, coined by Rod Brooks again. And the idea is that if you have a body, you will be able to understand your interaction with the world and allow you to behave smartly or better, more efficiently, more according to the parameters where you're living, and then you can take better decisions. So that is the approach to sensitive robotics, and that's how complicated problems like handling these very small pieces, we have solved it without having to go through this very complex modeling, lots of computation being used. Instead, we distribute the computation on the sensing and all along the body. We change the architecture at the control level, the computational level, but that will be a longer conversation to have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Holy cow. It's so interesting going from the typical classical thought process for people with computer vision to sensitive robotics.
Right.
Because, and now combining them together.
Right.
Yeah.
So all the techniques of machine learning and things like that, we still use it, but no, what I will call, let's say, brute force for computer vision, which we put tons of images and we try to get it. We do the same thing, but to understand this type of signals. What patterns we can recognize out of this will be useful to control the robot. So that's the idea behind.
Okay, and I see we have it's because it's the big combination of both the sensor development and figuring out how to make soft contact on the object, the actual algorithms themselves, how to maintain contact. I thought this was really exciting because you mentioned the slippage. Right. If right now I feel it kind of slipping a little bit. I'm like letting the cup slip a little in my hand. And so how do you maintain that contact? And then if it's slipping, then you grab and re-grip. And so then you have to center it, re-grip it, reduce the stress on it. So that way maybe if it's soft, you need to reduce the stress a little. There's all of these nuances that are being built into this, as well.
So this is, it basically changes a lot of things in the way you approach this problem. All the ones you said are physical, but then to the architectural level, instead of creating AI to have a plan for everything, we use what's called behavior-based architecture. So we create very simple behaviors. You can think as we create reflexes. As you go higher in the hierarchy, we create more complicated behaviors and we modulate them. So that's another way to approach it that hasn't been that popular. And when I'm saying not that popular is because now AI, everyone talks about machine learning and AI. But this other area, which is as complex, is kind of forgotten or in the background right now. So behaviors, combination of behaviors, action selection, all those things are implemented in this architecture in order to do this. Because what happens is when you have tons of sensors, normally you have a camera and it has tons of sensors there, but you deal that like a separate process. Okay, that is the sensing and it will give me something. There's a person, there's a car, there's something. When you have all the sensors distributed, now you can separate them, but you need to organize tons of sensors. So if you try to centralize everything, it becomes a problem. So we distribute the computation and we distribute the local behavior by creating these behaviors again. And then you put them all together. And so it emulates a lot how we believe that the neural system in the people, the nervous system in people is distributed. So we have a lot of computation around our head, but then as you go to the spinal cord, there's a lot of local computation
and so here, and then it keeps like that. That's the extending the computational processing to the different locations rather than centralizing all. Okay, so let's run you through a couple of these questions, especially since you're in this field. I think it's important to ask. How often do you think about, and what do you think about, the ethics and the philosophy behind AI?
There are many important questions there, right? So I think, we have a lot of fear about what can happen. And then there's some applications that are purely based in data that we need to control, right? That it would be good to have some rules. But there is always this belief that AI is going to take over and it's going to run our society. And that is, I feel like, no well understood fear. Usually when you understand things, then you don't fear it, and it's mainly that's not understood. It's, when you see things like this, when you, physical applications of AI, like robotics, it's very easy to see how behind we are. So when people go around saying, oh, the robots are going to take over, it's very difficult to believe it's not going to happen. Is it that we're going to have better tools for us to use it? Yes, that's true. But robots taking over the world, that is something that is not there, and people in general, we should try to talk more and understand what are the principles behind to avoid that fear, and not make it a complicated issue out of something that we're very far away from there.
Yes, but even today we have instances of there being some sort of oops moments that we have, and how do we kind of bake in ethics and philosophy into programming culture? How do we
give me an example of the oops moment, just to guide my answer?
Okay. Even an oops moment like telling something to maximize my route to get to a place to another place, and then you decide to go through an area that might be restricted access and it might hurt somebody, or maximize my monetary outcome, or even as far as to just point out the obvious one with bot networks, social bots, is we have this oops moment now when we say that, it was probably not that great of an idea to have all these psychometric profiles that are then able to be manipulated by the way that we push content that enrages their emotions and stuff like that. So anyway, there's these different examples, but yeah.
Right, but let me make maybe a distinction as I see it, right? So I think having control on how personal data is shared or is being used, it's very important. But that is different from AI. So the gathering of data, if it's legal, not legal, should we do it? It's something that we definitely need to address. And yes, that's something I prefer to have my information as private as possible. It took a long time for my friends forced me to get into Facebook, because otherwise we would not be able to communicate. Otherwise I wouldn't have done it, right? But I agree, so that is one specific issue. Now the algorithms and AI is the reason of the problem, right? Is that there's data and we will create algorithms, maybe we didn't call it AI, to exploit that. And that is coming from, I guess, always the possibility in human nature of trying to do something bad with the technology that you have, right? Same as we have when we have nuclear power, we decide, it's not a good idea to give it to everyone, right? Because we might destroy the planet right away. So it's kind of like the same thing, right? So yes, there is this new capability, but it's not the capability itself that it has been bad, right? We have used radiation coming from nuclear developments for other good things. And we're not saying that that's the reason why it's bad. People sometimes say nuclear energy
How we use the technology is the ultimate question. And so then the idea of figuring out how to bake together philosophy with programming and stuff it's an interesting kind of future that I foresee. Okay, I want to
say one thing about philosophy. I think philosophy is very important to be taught. It's something we're forgetting now.
Yeah.
We're giving a lot of information and no philosophy.
Yeah.
And that's what usually causes all these problems. So
Exactly.
Sorry.
Exactly. If we had a little bit more of the values baked into the foundation, then we wouldn't have so many of these problems.
Yeah. And as a professor, I saw that many times. So,
yeah. Okay. How about, and I think you mentioned that to me when we were hanging out too. Yeah. Okay, how about we ask you, with the proliferation of AI and robotics across the world, especially mixing together sensitive robotics with computer vision now, it seems now we're even closer to these moments. But we're now seeing massive job displacement, but we're also seeing new jobs be made across different fields. But it's kind of the end of the repetitive workforce. The service industry, retail industry, driving, all these kind of things. What do you think we should do to prevent some sort of a big, both retrain, how do we retrain, but how do we prevent a class-based speciation where wealth, one end goes very wealthy, one end goes, what do I do with my time now? Do I get universal basic income? What do I do?
So many things about that. So, first is like we have, as humanity, lived this process a number of times. So it probably will be very responsible as humanity to accept that we go through these processes and, have rules about that. Sure, new technologies are going to come. I don't think it's good for anyone trying to forbid them or trying to ban them just because they're going to displace jobs.
Of course.
Instead, I think it's as a humanity, it's okay, where this new technology is going to do this, we should either create a commission or create something that allows us to do this transition. Mm-hmm. Many creative things we might develop to deal with this. If someone is 60 years old and has been doing always harvesting strawberries, if we know that it cannot do anything else, we should be sensitive and say, well, maybe create a program for either retraining or some sort of welfare. No, not necessarily this, because just having welfare for no reason is not a good idea. Yeah. But if we as humanity say, well, now we're bringing this new thing that makes us more efficient, there are many ways to do taxes, many public policies to deal with this thing. So I think what's important is to say, yes, that is a transition, and as we as humanity are recognizing this, and we're going to face it as opposed to let the market do it. That's when overarching idea of what's happening is helpful, because the business is not going to do that, because the business is trying to work with new technologies to be productive, and that's what they're trying to do. They're being honest about it. The people being displaced sometimes the people who have no options, so we do need to protect them in some way, because otherwise then we're just creating a crisis for no reason.
Yeah,
right?
And that's a really important one to address along the way, this transition with AI and robotics. How do we do it smoothly and safely? Okay, how about quick last question. Let's ask you, what do you think is the most beautiful thing in the world?
For me, I love sunsets in the beach, when you get to see, how small we are, seeing this big planning coming out, and we sometimes say, this big piece of matter, the sun coming out or coming down, and say, well, we're very small, but we get to enjoy all these very beautiful things created by this humongous process like fission that's happening in the sun.
Yes.
But for you, it is reflected to your sensors, and then you as a person feel like, oh, I'm so small, but this is so amazing and stimulating my sensing. And so that's one of those moments that I like to enjoy, and that in many areas in meditations, or especially they call it enjoy the moment. And so I chose this to be most beautiful, because I do that very often, or I used to do this when I was at school, sitting on the Charles River in Boston, looking over when this is happening. And it always was a moment of peace to get out of the problems that are, when you take a bigger perspective, they're not that big at all, right? If you get to see where you are. So
I love that answer. We love sunsets as well, and sunrises.
Oh, great.
They're so important. They're so important. Okay, what a good show.
I'm glad we did it.
Yeah, that was outstanding, Eduardo. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
This was a blast. We learned so much today. Sensitive robotics, the importance of this in the future, how it all works. Yeah. And we're really excited to, to down the line when maybe we can bring some of the samples on the show. We'll play around with it, and we'll go into more detail once you guys are ready to share about what exactly is going on. That's fun to know about. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We greatly appreciate you. If you had a good time, give the content a share it with other people, get them excited about AI and robotics and all these different ways that we're sensing. And subscribe, join us on Patreon. We need to sustain the studio, sustain our project, and keep inspiring people around the world, so join us there. And we will see you guys soon. Thanks to our producing partner, Ron Vargas. Much love, everyone. See ya.